Hello, everyone. This is Regular Guy, and this is the fourth installment in my series on wheat. I'm opening with this image of Butthead being struck, I think dead, by this woman uh, working in tandem with this man here. You can see their team. They had this all mapped out in advance. So these people are probably hunter gatherers, foragers, something like that. And they've come and they've uh, done, I don't know, they've taken over the homestead. Okay. Butthead's no longer going to be sitting on the sofa. Beavis, it's sad what happened to him. He's got a shovel in his hand. He's all ready to start. He's desperate to get those nachos grown, and he's out there in the garden. And then, it becomes another couple of foragers, hunter gatherers, and they put an end to poor Beavis. Okay, so we're not going to be talking about them so much going forward. But I do want to talk a little bit about their legacy because it can be seen here in this absurd piece of sedentist propaganda. First of all the animals that came to roost at Beavis and Butthead's mud flat are seen here. About 6,000 years after Beavis and Butthead were removed from the premises. Now, the other thing is that this isn't anywhere near that area of the world. There's no alluvium or whatever down here or up here. This is somewhere off in, like, England, I guess. Somebody went and dug a big trench in the ground, a big mud pit. They exposed the trophic food web. And then they brought over all the animals that were at Beavis and Butthead's house. And then they built this very sturdy stone wall all around it to make sure, this thing will last a long time. It's not meant to be a mobile thing here. Okay. So this is like, 6,000 years after Beavis and Butthead. We've got people in this modern era recreating that whole ecology, that sort of terrain that Beavis and Butthead created. Notice they're creating it for the animals. Beavis and Butthead are gone. The animals here are happy as they can be, right? They have that herd instinct. That's why one of the reasons they were a good fit at Beavis and Butthead's house. They don't mind crowding. They don't mind living right up next to each other. They've had 6 to 10,000 years or whatever to share diseases and get the pathogen situation worked out with each other. So they're doing pretty good. People in this picture, I don't want to say too much about them just yet, but I think the easiest way to think about this is that they suffer from a kind of chronic illness. Okay, they were not born with these clothes or anything like that. Okay, nor is there any like natural or anything related to their biology that would require them to wear these clothes or to be doing any of the things that they're doing or be where they are. There's no reason for them to be visiting a mud pit with the Beavis and Butthead animals, unless they're archaeologists, I guess, or James C. Scott or something. But then another weird thing is the guy has a shepherd's crook in his hand. He's got a Neolithic tool. Now, both of these people, if you asked them, why are you wearing these clothes? Why are you holding these things in your hands? Neither of them could probably tell you. And I'm going to suggest that the best way to look at these clothes and these things that they're holding, this absurd dance or whatever, this ritual that they're doing, this all is reflects a chronic illness that they're afflicted with. And I'm going to call the illness Gilgamesh. Because James C. Scott seems to think that Gilgamesh, to the extent anyone thinks he was a real person, they seem to think that he lived around the time that this disease, well, around the time that we find patient zero, okay? This place called Uruk, around 3200 BC. Scott says it all kind of started there. The disease got started there. Remember, the last chapter is all about diseases, herding diseases, diseases that follow the crops, and the animals and the people anytime they get together in crowded conditions. And I think the best way to think of a state here, and that maybe the best way to make sense of the way James C. Scott's describing the state here, is to think of the state as a kind of disease, like a long-term chronic disease that afflicts the immunocompromised, and that further compromises their immune system and results in like these kind of skin cancers, like you see, on these people, these sort of benign tumors, maybe, but these clothes and these things in their hands that they have to carry now, they're burdened with this stuff for no good reason. They're afflicted with Gilgamesh. Okay, that's what they got. Now, I think it may be helpful to think of Gilgamesh as one of the opportunistic bottom feeders that was being carried along by that alluvial mud every time it flooded, along with all the other creepy crawlies that were buried in there, and all the protozoa and the viruses and all that stuff. It was just one. It was just another one of those little, you know, critters waiting for the right moment to cause a disease or something like that. Gilgamesh is a pyrophyte. Gilgamesh found itself at home at Beavis and Butthead's mud flat, like the mud, apparently. But Gilgamesh wasn't a good suit for the ecology of that era. If you remember, the Earth had warmed up significantly. There was water everywhere, so it was hot and it was wet. And it turns out that Gilgamesh doesn't do well in those conditions. So Gilgamesh is being carried along by the mud, but it's not flourishing in the conditions that exist because it's too hot and it's too wet. Gilgamesh thrives in, let's say, more arid environments where water is more scarce. But otherwise, it's just like all those other diseases that were described in chapter 3. Um, it relies on the ecology of the Neolithic grain and manpower module in order to thrive. Okay, it needs that to sort of feed itself. It's just that when conditions are too wet, it doesn't do well. It doesn't really take off. Okay. Now Scott down here talks about states parasitizing people. Says its stateness is kind of on a spectrum. It's like a more or less proposition, not a strictly either or. So, Gilgamesh is like that. It's a disease that you can have, you can have a bad case or a mild case. You might get over it. But, if left unchecked, it can it can result in these tumors growing out of the people's skin like that. So Gilgamesh always appears or Gilgamesh only appears when you have an alluvial grain farming population. Okay. So wheat is a grain. Gilgamesh requires grain. And so might be a connection. All right. Now, Gilgamesh, how do you know when someone's got full-blown Gilgamesh? Well, Scott says walls, taxation, and officials. Okay, Gilgamesh has walls, Gilgamesh collects taxes, and the officials imply some kind of regular order, some kind of repeating pattern, maybe. And, you can take a biopsy of a tumor and look at it under a microscope and tell by the way that it's organized, the cellular level, you can classify it. So, same thing with states. There has to be some kind of regulation occurring there, some officials to, keep the tumor, intact. And so, here's our patient 0 with full-blown Gilgamesh in 3200 BC, the era of high civilization, according to this person, Nissen. Okay. And Gilgamesh's main tumor, the capital tumor, was the city called Uruk. Okay. We have tissue samples from Uruk. It was so big that left a lot of itself behind. Uruk affected 25 to 50,000 people. At the time, that would have been the largest agglomeration of people in any one place. I think I talked about that in the last video. And as I mentioned in that last video, the reason that it took so long to get a town with 25 to 50,000 people in it was because of disease. Anytime you population was a limiting factor in the sense that as soon as people got together in any large numbers, something would happen. Maybe Scott thinks a disease would strike. Okay, but now people have over time traded enough bacteria and viruses and whatnot with each other that they can uh, create this population of up to 50,000 people, maybe, uh, and sustain it. They're able to even grow the population from that stage. Okay. So this is a point where there are enough people for Gilgamesh to strike. Okay. Gilgamesh strikes in these dry conditions, but also conditions where there are lots of people concentrated together. So the late Neolithic multi species resettlement camp has to get to a really good size. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't still getting sick and dying. It doesn't mean that people are fundamentally different creatures or behaviorally in terms of their thinking or whatever from the people that lived in Beavis and Butthead's time. However, a common practice that Scott mentioned in the previous chapters is slavery among the hunter gatherers, among people who weren't living in the people. Beavis and Butthead didn't have to go out and enslave anyone. The hunter gatherers were taking each other as prisoners of war, and so slavery was already a thing before any of this happened. Before Beavis and Butthead started watching TV, and before Gilgamesh came along, there was already slavery. But now there's this standardization happening. Like somebody sat down and measured how much food and beer a slave should get. And that implies that they have a whole lot of slaves. Okay. You don't normally need to standardize, if you only got a couple dozen slaves, but if you got a couple thousand, then sure. Now, Scott isn't saying that Gilgamesh caused slavery. All right. Neither am I. Just saying that slavery was there. All right. Now, whether it was necessary for slavery to exist in order for all these other things to happen, I don't know. But doesn't matter because it existed. And so the main thing that really changed here is there's climate change again, old climate change. It's like 1,000 years here where it dries up and the waters retreat. All that water, all that was carrying Beavis and Butthead's house around is gone by 3,200 or 3,500 BC or so. It's much drier conditions. That's why, by the way, when they got, kicked out of the house, that's why you see that everything is, firmly fixed in the ground at this point. There's fences. These buildings don't float, and so it was the fact that it was so dry. That's what drove Beavis to such extreme, measures that he would actually pick up a shovel. That's how bad things were. So all that water that was down was flooding the Mesopotamia. It's getting vacuumed back up into the glaciers or whatever. It's not there it's not in Mesopotamia at least. And so this has kind of a snowball effect because it causes populations to become even more concentrated than they were before. You're chasing water. Water is shrinking back and there's less and less water. And so wherever there's water, you're getting a higher concentration of people. Right. And now you're seeing city states fighting over land that can be cultivated and access to water. Right. Now he's not calling them states, okay, but these are expansions of the Neolithic economic module or the Neolithic package, okay? This is really kind of like Mad Max, not the first Mad Max, but certainly the second one, okay? Instead of fuel, it's water. You got these outposts of people competing with each other over water. It probably, was a lot like that. So one way to think of this late Neolithic multi-species, what did we call it? Resettlement camp, is that it's being afflicted by a series of chronic conditions, chronic lack of water, overconcentration, and fighting. And furthermore, there's a need to do labor. There's a need to dig canals so that you can get water back to some of this mud, make it muddy again. Keep growing nachos. Remember, at the end of the last video, I pointed out that people at this time are not doing much to take care of their own health other than getting out of town whenever a pandemic strikes. However, they are taking care of the health of the plants, the nacho plants. They're going out there and they're cleaning the weeds. And now they're also making sure that those plants get water. Okay, that's mainly what they're fighting over is water, but they're fighting over water because they want to get water to the mud, and they want to get water to the mud so they can grow nachos. Okay, so these are people who see Beavis and Butthead as sort of a state that they're trying to return to. Okay, they're trying to gain back. They're trying to go back in time and recreate something that can't exist anymore because the climate has changed. Anyway, I put in green here, the dense concentration of grain and manpower maximize the possibilities of appropriation, stratification, and inequality. Now, appropriation, stratification, inequality all have corollaries. I think in the growth of tumors. Tumors appropriate your blood supply at least. There's some stratification there. There's tumors distinguishing itself from your cells, and there's some inequality. The tumors, benefiting, and you're not getting anything in return. Tumors just all take and no give, right? Now this tumor is a little weird. A little different from actual tumor. Okay, this tumor can amplify parts of the host. It can scale up parts of the host that it likes. Okay. So again, this tumor just crawled out of the mud, and for some reason it has a thing for geese that lay golden eggs. Okay. Now, Beavis and Butthead have absolutely no use for a goose that lays golden eggs. The goose is noisy, it's filthy, it's dirty, it chases away the ducks, and they're nasty. They're territorial. And then this one, you can't even eat the eggs. It's total, but the tumor, for whatever reason, Gilgamesh likes geese that lay golden eggs. So, the people are out there providing geese that lay golden eggs for Gilgamesh. Not geese that lay eggs they can eat or whatever, but Gilgamesh, whatever. When people get cancer, they don't sit there and argue with the tumor and say, "Why are you doing this?" I mean, maybe they do on some level, but not like that. This term here, that interregna, okay, it's in red there. That's actually a good word. I should probably put it in green or something. That's a good thing. You want interregna. That's when the cancer's in remission. All right. Interregna. Now, interregna can have there could be a couple different reasons why interregna happens. It could happen because just all the hosts die, and then the disease dies with them. Okay. It could also be, though, that people figure out a way to cure the disease. All right. They just cure the disease. Now, Gilgamesh is an odd disease in that the only way to really cure Gilgamesh is just to get out of town. Just abandon the city, all right? Or civilization or whatever, just get out of it, leave. Go out of town, go live out in the woods, okay? That's the cure for Gilgamesh. If you want to cure it, within your lifetime, that's how you do it. You get out of town. Otherwise, it's, more likely that it's just going to kill all the hosts, and then you're just going to have interregna because there's no one around to carry Gilgamesh, you know? So that happened in Egypt a bunch of times. Egypt carried Gilgamesh for sometimes centuries at a time. The third time, you know, they had an interregnum that lasted 600 years. Okay, so or 400 years, I think. Can't remember, but anyway, it was a long time. Um, you could almost see some of these things like floods and pest attacks and diseases and whatnot as, you know, they all cause interregna. Okay, they all, in a sense, could cure Gilgamesh. Okay, you get enough pest attacks, enough floods, enough rainfall that you could possibly. I mean, that could be catastrophe. That could be a catastrophe in other ways, but could, in fact, could cure you of Gilgamesh. Anyway, in green here, I put the recipe for interregna in case you want to write it down. Scatter as hunters, foragers, and pastoralists to sustain yourself. That's the cure. All right. That's the recipe. Now, you know, Gilgamesh is affecting this already immunocompromised population, this huge population that's all crowded together. It's running out of water. This population that's fixated on just producing grain, grain. Okay, like the easiest thing for them to produce, that was just growing in the mud, you know, that they were snacking on before. But here's the question you got to ask: why does Gilgamesh like grain? What is it about grain? Gilgamesh, okay, likes dry conditions. Takes doesn't when it's too wet. Gilgamesh doesn't really take off, but dries out. Gilgamesh takes off. You get high concentration of people. Gilgamesh takes off. But the people, grain's somehow part of the mix for Gilgamesh. Now again, this isn't good for the hosts. Okay, the hosts. If Gilgamesh were concerned about the well-being of the hosts, it would have them do something else, or produce a range of foods, not just this grain. That's kind of a aspect of Gilgamesh that's really kind of disturbing. And so one of the really tragic consequences of Gilgamesh, aside from, just the fact that it seems to be terminal in all cases, is that while you have Gilgamesh and you're only eating grain, you're not getting any of the other stuff that you need. You're not producing it. So the only way to get it is to go steal it from somebody who's getting it, who doesn't already have Gilgamesh. So going back to this picture, these people that came in, knocked over Beavis and Butthead, took over that farm, okay? What's going on? Look at how advanced things were at this point, because there's no water. The house isn't floating anymore, okay? It's dry, so they got to try to recreate. They're already trying to recreate that alluvial soil there, and these people come in and knock over Beavis and Butthead. These people aren't part of a state. These are just regular old normal people. And for all we know, they were doing a great job at, sort of farming, and then maybe they were also foraging, and they were doing all kinds of stuff, Problem is all these other people got Gilgamesh. They don't have any of that stuff. All they have is this grain, so they might go over there and just knock off that farm, knock off the people that are on that farm, take all their stuff. Take all their people, because they got people that are dying of Gilgamesh, and they gotta. This is the other thing about Gilgamesh, is that again it needs that large population. Okay, it doesn't thrive when the population's too small, and so Gilgamesh can approach that problem from a couple different ways, right? It can go easy on the population, not kill them too fast, so that they can live into maturity, and Gilgamesh can keep feeding on them like a regular supply. The other thing Gilgamesh can do is it can just go find more people to feed off of after it's done feeding off the ones that it's got enclosed inside its walls, because remember, Gilgamesh has walls. So anyway, that's the first part of chapter 4. I'm going to end it there because I didn't want to talk about wheat in this video. But I'm the regular guy signing off.